The DX7, the finest synthesizer ever created by man.
It's the worst synthesizer known to mankind. It's a disgusting piece of shit.
I'm going to play that same thing again, so I can't think of any Elton John now. I wish I could think of some Elton John songs. Like, what was that? Oh, well, how did that... Oh, never mind, anyway.
Sexier than Miami Vice, the DX7 was the ultimate 80s gizmo. Unlike the humble electric piano, the DX7 had no knobs for boys to fiddle with. It was smooth, it was sleek, it was black. Verily, it was the Top Gun of home organs.
It is quite a sexy keyboard, actually. It's kind of got these sort of green sort of membrane sort of keys over it. Well, the Mark I did. I think like anything, you know, whether it's a keyboard or a motorbike or a car, Mark I's are generally the best of everything, and that is certainly true with the DX. Is that you had this green sort of silky membrane over it, where it was kind of those 80s kind of buttons that weren't actually sort of profiled off the surface. You just kind of touched them, and they had the effect.
When I first heard it, I couldn't believe that it wasn't recordings of sound. I thought, my God, that's a bass guitar, isn't it? And all this sort of thing, and that's a choir, and you know, I couldn't believe it was purely a synthesizer.
It appeared on top of the pops more often than anybody else in the 80s because they had the DX7 in the prop cupboard. And whenever you needed a keyboard, well, you'd be parked behind the DX7, and it didn't matter whether you were, you know, Depeche Mode or Sade or whatever, DX7.
It's quite a nice appearance, and with this sort of lovely sort of metal kind of brown case, a really beautiful keyboard, one of the loveliest feels of keyboard on it. I think that's why so many people used it as a master keyboard, and probably why it was the top of the pops keyboard as well, because, you know, it kind of felt and looked sort of pretty good. But I haven't slept with mine.
The DX7 was the first keyboard to sell over 1 million and single-handedly killed the Fender Rhodes electric piano, the classic keyboard of the 1970s.
I think it is officially the world's best-selling keyboard. I don't know if it's been surpassed now, but it is, you know, up to this point it is. And it just kind of represented a complete rethink in the sort of forms of synthesis at the time. It was the first time, I think, the general, well, not the general public, but the general sort of public of producers and musicians took a leap away from analog synthesis into a kind of an altogether sort of more daring sort of method of sound creation.
Sleek and sexy as it was, the DX7 was impossible to use, except in idiot mode.
I think what was so daring about the DX7, well, the whole range, was the sort of rethink in the approach to synthesis. It was the first time they stripped away all the sort of lovely knobs and faders, which up to that point it had been all about. There wasn't a single patch lead, you know, in kind of evidence anywhere on it. It was just all this sort of new kind of menu system where you'd look down and you had a little screen with one parameter on it at a time as to what you were changing about the sound's character. And it shocked a lot of people, and I think, you know, nobody apart from Brian Eno and later me learnt to program it, and I think that was kind of what made it such a sort of daring instrument for anyone to start using.
For a lot of people, it was an easy option because it had, you know, you had instant electric. It was famous for its kind of electric piano sounds and its strings and brass. But it was almost, unless you devoted your life to it, it was almost impossible to edit. I mean, even though the DX7, the basic synthesizer, the structure, the architecture was fantastic, and the way it created the sounds, but it was so difficult to get at and so unuser-friendly and uninteractive that very few people even bothered tweaking the sounds even in the slightest. So you began to hear exactly the same sounds on every record, and for a lot of people that was what defined electronic music at the time, and to me that was just like home organ, the kind of posh home organ in a sense.
I remember when the Yamaha DX7 came out, and I did try one. I think I probably used it once on something just because I found a sound I liked, but I was never a fan.
There's a kind of a sound of 80s records which is kind of characterised very much by the DX7, especially kind of mid-80s sounds, and because it was such a commercial success that every other synthesizer company wanted to try and copy it, and the development of interesting synthesizers seemed to stop for a while.
It always struck me as being an instrument that session musicians used. You know, if you'd ever be in a studio and there was someone in the studio next door, they'd always have a DX7. And that really put me off because I thought, oh God, they're all over everything, you know. And I found the sounds a little too thin and gidgy sounding for my taste. I like bigger, warm sounds. I think Yamaha made some great things over the years, but I was not a fan at all of the DX7.
There's a kind of finish, kind of stabby, I don't know, it's kind of cold, but not cold in a good, not good cold, you know, bad cold. Cold that was trying to be warm, do you know what I mean, as opposed to cold that was trying to be cold, which is very different, you know. And again, it kind of, the tyranny of the keyboard player kind of returned a little bit, you know, and we were very anti kind of that at the time, you know. I mean, we were, you know, 3 chords were far too much, let alone a bloody, you know, whole keyboard full of chords, you know. So, you know, and I think people that I worked with and people I liked, were still kind of, we're avoiding those kind of cliches, you know.
The epic sound of the DX7 became a staple of big rock acts in the 1980s, such as U2, Dire Straits, Phil Collins and Foreigner.
It's so identifiably 80s, you know, whereas I think things like all the analog things sound fresh now. I don't think the digital things like that sound fresh. I think they sound, you know, sort of dated in a way. But I guess it's all how you, I mean, like you know, it's all how you use the stuff, really. That's why I'll check it out. But I mean, that was a revolutionary piece of gear because, you know, it was the first, and it was MIDI, and, you know, it was just, you know, it was, you know, I used to use it a lot, but not on any of the special records, you know, not on the best records. It just was ones, you know, when I try to do like a rock record that sounded like Foreigner again, you know, those kind of sounds. Joshua Tree, probably Genesis, Peter Gabriel, it was like that kind of sound, you know. But I guess now, actually, if you go back and now you really affect the sounds, I'm sure. And also, if you were a real genius with it and you were able to manipulate the sounds, which you had the ability to, you could probably do some great sound.
The horrible sounds of the DX, which I talked about earlier, were these sort of the A&R pianos, which were these, which is complete sort of Elton John kind of, you know, sort of territory. And the other thing that it was sort of so bad for was its kind of emulation of instruments. I mean, like, you know, this is supposed to be a saxophone, which, you know, Kenny G would like, but I don't. So, it's, you know, that's not really where its strength lie. The sort of strength of these kind of these synths is in their sort of, you know, their sort of evolving kind of, you know, sort of textures that would grow out of them. Which is just far more interesting and kind of, you know, quite unique in their sound. Also, their lead sounds were really brilliant. I mean, you had loud sounds out of it as well, but, you know, these kind of, which are kind of, although on that kind of analog tip, there's something very harsh and very abrasive about them, which kind of, you know, kind of puts them in their, you know, completely in their own sort of territory, really. And that sort of biting sound was something that was also added here, which was the touch sensitiveness of it. Now, with your early sort of synths, your early analog synths, it doesn't matter how hard you hit it, you get the same sound out of it. With these, as you could kind of start off with these sort of this very sort of soft sound, and it would sort of end up, you know, you could kind of really develop it along it, and then which makes it really useful for expressive kind of playing. You know, just very sort of inspirational to kind of play almost.
The DX7 as a classic machine changed the face of keyboard players out of the solo thing of being able to play, because it could do everything from your clavinet sounds to and brass sounds and all sorts of things. And the string sounds that weren't too bad. Still sounded a bit farfeezer-ish, but weren't too bad. And it was a very clever machine. I mean, very, very clever. Changed the whole face of keyboard.